problem usually because your tool sticks to everything, and then you also push in the floor here and it'll cave it in. So you have to really be careful not to. So I got this pretty centered. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it needs to be close, within, I think within a 1/16 of an inch. This part's a little less centered than down here. I'm not too concerned about that because this isn't really that round. It's kind of irregular. And that's the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that irregularity, and it makes it much more even. So I'm going to make sure you hold that tool nice and firmly. There's a tendency for people to trim like that fast. And when you do that, everything gets really uneven. So I always deal with the outside first. You can trim down pretty far. You don't have to stop here and then. You can taper that off so it doesn't have a weird ending. Once that's done, then I'll do this part. I go in about a 1/2 inch, carve out a groove. I just think this is the easiest way to do it. Start out with a little groove like that. You can always make this narrower if you don't like how thick it is. But if you get too far out here, sometimes what happens is you wander off like that, and then you'll take a big chunk out of this part.
We want to be doing it that fast.
I trim about this fast, yeah. You don't want to go too fast, but I think right around there, we're about the same speed as you throw. Too slow, you end up making things pretty uneven. Just gotta hold on to that tool nice and firmly. And it's at like a 45. And I'm holding it at about 3 o'clock. You don't want to be over here. If you put your wrist or your forearm on your leg, that'll be better. If you do this, sometimes what happens is you end up following, but you don't want to keep it fixed. And I'll just take out that middle chunk. It can be that simple. Make a line on the outside and just take out the middle chunk. Usually using this flat tool will do the job. You should really know how much clay you have there too. If you're just blindly doing it, it's easy to trim through the bottom. I'm going to leave that bottom kind of wider like that. Just without water, just soften the edges so they're not sharp. I'll save this guy for a glaze demo next week, but let's do this one next. This one has, I think, a little bit more clay than the other one. So if you're good enough at this, you can just eyeball it. You never really have to fuss around with them too much, you know. I know I got that pretty centered. The other thing you can do is you can either use your finger like this and watch that gap, or you can put a needle tool or like the stick tool and watch the gap that way. You just do this until it's even. It's never perfect because as much as you think pots are really super symmetrical and even, there's always a little wobble or irregularity this, if it's like a ½ inch off, it's gonna be hard to trim. And the more vertical and tall they get, that one's pretty flat and wide, so they tend not to want to fly off the wheel. But when they get a little taller like this, sometimes I like to keep my left hand. If I'm pushing on the outside like this, trimming on the outside, I like to put my hand right here to keep it from flipping off the wheel. Because I'm pushing like this, sometimes the bowl will fall off. And I'm just pushing slightly here. First, take some of this off. Now I got a bit of clay here, so I'm just going to go down about 3/8 of an inch or so. And then I'm just going to take that. If you have that groove and then you just use this flat one, hold it kind of like a pencil here. Just kind of tilt it into the inside like that. You can take off quite a bit. Without pushing too hard, because you can grab it and pull it right through the bottom of your bowl. Sometimes you gouge it and pull the whole thing off, because it takes some practice. And I'll just go from the center out.
If you were going to do a berry bowl, how would you put the holes in the bottom of it?
We have some, they look like brass kind of tubes that have a taper on the end. They cut holes in and they take the little piece with them. That's the easiest way. You can use just a regular like drill bit from the wood drill bit. That works.
Like once it's done, or you have to do it now, right?
Do it now.
Yeah.
So once you get your foot done, then you put the holes around
And you can put the
outside
holes. Yep.
and in the inside.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of holes. Just a few. Thing with the wood, the problem with the drill bit is it leaves a little burr. And those tools are nice because they can take that little burr. They don't leave a burr. So let's put it up.
And they'll do that when it's done. They'll drill that hole.
Yep. Okay, so cups and around about and then I'm going to show PowerPoint and cups. I'm going to put handles on these guys on Wednesday. Don't worry about handles today. I'll show some different ways to make handles. I'll just go through a couple of cups here and So what you're gonna be making for the assignment are basically like mugs. Mugs with handles, alright? The idea is to get people just to actually make a different form, but also learn how to make handles and attach them. So now you're gonna really have to think about making using a lot less clay. When beginners start making cups, they tend to make them kind of thick and too heavy, and they use way too much clay. This can make a pretty large mug. This is probably maybe a little over a pound. If you want to make a small mug, you can like 3/4 of a pound to a pound. A larger mug is a pound and a quarter or so. So you don't want a coffee mug that's extremely thick and funky. So that's the challenge, I think, when you start making these, is trying to make them so they're not really thick. We're not going to trim them. The trimming is being done on the bowls. We're not going to trim these. So you're going to make the bottoms nice and thin like you did with your cylinders. So basically you're making a little cylinder and then shaping it. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to make a kind of a scaled down cylinder. Everything's going to be just a little bit thinner, not as thick as your cylinders were. You want that rim to be nice and comfortable to drink from. So you start with a cylinder. You don't really make a shape until the cylinder. So this kind of shows you how, cylinder is really important because it's kind of the beginning of all kinds of shapes and pottery. Almost everything starts from a cylinder. Not to do anything fancy, just a real basic mug. And I think the idea is to think about what you can do to reshape that cylinder. You don't have to get super fancy or crazy. Make sure that water stays on the inside. Then I go and put more in. But I don't want it puddling in there, but I still need water to throw it. Because if it sits in the bottom, you get cracks in your cups. Now that I have a kind of basic cylinder shape, I'm going to just alter it slightly. And so if you push from the outside, it's going to get wider. Maybe from the inside, it's going to get wider. Push from the outside, you can narrow it down. So Just experiment with using the rib. It's gonna change the shape a little bit. You can think about where you're gonna put the handle. And also really try hard to think about, I'm not gonna trim this, so I don't want the bottom to be unfinished and sharp. I kind of let people get away with that a little bit on those cylinders. I didn't say much about it, but on your cups here, you want to make sure that this bottom is nice and finished, not all sharp. And, after you cut it off, you can do some cleaning up. So now you need to remember that you're going to put handles on these too, so you can't let them dry out. You have to leave them leather hard. Same as when you're trimming. You just can't put a handle on things that are bone dry. Because part of the deal is that you want handle on these guys. I'm not going to do a lot of them. I'm going to show you some images. We have that 500 cups book that has a lot of stuff in it. You get the idea. You throw a cylinder and you can make a lot of stuff from a cylinder. So this one's pretty small. There's not a lot of play here. It can be really basic. Here, I'll just make something that's really so now you're thinking about leaving that floor about a 1/4 inch thick or less. Not so thin that it's gonna cut through with the wire, but if you leave the bottom too thick, you're gonna end up with pretty heavy cups. And if you just leave, it is challenging to try to make these things as thin as you can, but try it. Bowls are things that can be a little on the generous, thicker side, but
Not this thick, probably.
that's a little.
It's so heavy.
But you don't want, when you start dealing with something with this diameter, you don't want them thick. It's basically like those things that need to be in. Maybe it's just a matter of flaring it out a little bit. It doesn't have to be a really complicated shape. stick tool, I'll just get rid of some of that extra plate on it. You're always gonna have that bit of extra plate at the bottom. And that's where all that extra weight's gonna hide, you know, it's, the cups are gonna be a little heavy if you leave too much on here. It's kind of pushing out on the inside a little bit to try to. So at noon, right after our break, we'll go to 190 and I'll spend like 10, 15 minutes. So I've got like 40 images I'm gonna show you guys, and then also look at those books. You can get as creative as you want. You know, if you want to do a little hand building in addition to it, that's fine. And I show handles on